Hello again, and I'd like to talk to you today about regulation of evangelism. The reason I want to talk about that is because I think evangelism is probably a sore subject for most and an important subject for most in different ways. It's important because Jesus claims in Gospel according to John that he is resurrection and life. So it's kind of important that we know who he is. And we appreciate knowing who he is, so why wouldn't other people? And we appreciate somebody having told us something about God, however imperfect it was. And that's what I want to really talk about. We care a lot about other people, and I really do think that's true. And I think that it's not so much that the world around us wants to regulate the way we do evangelism, so much as the church itself regulates its own evangelism. And I think it's a desire to do a good job. But when you think about regulations on evangelism, you think like, I want you to do it with a pure motive. I want you to do a good job. You have to have love in your heart. This person can't just be a project. You have to care about them. You should also watch the sin that you're engaged in the personal life, so on and so forth. Watch the theology of it. So there's a lot of regulations, and a lot of those are good, but at the same time, we have to consider this. Over-regulating something can actually shut it down or destroy it. So there's some examples. Now I'll start with the most harmless. I regulate my children's sugar intake by putting demands on them before they're allowed to have candy. So they can have candy if they've obeyed me for the most part all day. They've done their chores and they've eaten all of the dinner. I mean, every single little scrap of it. And part of that's because I don't care if they have candy or not. Candy's not good for them. It's just fun, but I do want them to eat their dinner. So it's a regulation where I get what I want. Doubly, actually. I get them to obey me and eat their food, and, they don't eat candy as much, because if they don't eat it all, they don't get their candy. So for them, they get less of what they want, but I get what I want. Small businesses complain about regulations, saying that it harms their growth because it weighs them down with too many burdens. So that may be like a middle example, because it's more important than a child eating candy for the state of society, I guess. But I still don't think that the regulators making those regulations are by and large doing it on purpose. I still think it's relatively, well, maybe, probably relatively innocent in terms of those who are making the regulations. Now, there's a really, really wicked example of Jim Crow laws where the emancipated black man was allowed to vote, but then was given so many regulations that it was actually taken away from him. And you could vote if your grandfather voted. It's like, well, emancipation and voting rights just happened. How could my grandfather have? So there's regulations where you accidentally harm something, kind of like the business one. There's regulations that are kind of harmless, like the one with me and my kids and candy. And then there are totally wicked ones, like Jim Crow laws, where you can say you're doing the right thing, but really, you're making regulations to destroy something. Now, I bring up this whole spectrum of regulations for a purpose. Largely, I don't think the world around us is regulating evangelism. I think it's usually the church itself. It's trying to police its own members and wanting evangelism to be really good or whatever. So I worry about the overregulation, though, because evangelism is important, and I wouldn't want to regulate it out of existence. And so we need to consider these examples, because whether they're super harmless or whether they're accidentally harmful, or whether they're deliberately harmful, it is true that regulating something can be a burden to the point of sometimes just destroying what you're trying to do. So if the church wants to do evangelism, it can't regulate it so much that everyone's scared to do it, or nobody tries. It'd also be helpful to think about a basketball coach who is so scared that his players aren't going to make a basket that he doesn't let them shoot. I mean, it wouldn't make any sense. They would never get better. And that's the thing I'd really like to get at. You have permission to do a not perfect job. You do. And to be honest with you, you'll never get better if you don't try. So I think that the church, at least in my circles, cares so much about doing evangelism well. And there may be some among us who actually do want to destroy it, and that's why they regulate it too much. You have to have this pure of a motive when you talk to somebody. You know, they can't be a project at all. And what does that even mean? You have to have 100% love in your heart for this person. It's like, well, okay, that's good, but I can't remember the last time my heart was perfect. Okay, so maybe I should just crawl into my room in the dark and just be quiet. Yeah, all the time I have mixed motives. I'm sure. I'm not a psychologist, but I'm sure I do. Every time you've ever talked to me, if you have ever talked to me that day, I have probably sinned or done something selfish, or maybe even while we're talking, my motives aren't pure. But does that mean I should just be in a corner and not do anything and be quiet? No, like, you should be yourself, and you should talk about Jesus if you want to, even if you're kind of a jerk sometimes. Now, are you going to be mean while talking about Jesus? That'd be awful. Please don't do that. I mean, regulations have some purpose, but if you were a jerk last Thursday, that doesn't mean you can't go to dinner tonight and talk about Jesus if you want to. I mean, there are certain points where regulations are absurd. We have to think about how the message itself is the power of God for those who are being saved. It's not us, right? Romans chapter 1, it's not we who are the power of God for those who are being saved, right? It's the message. It's the gospel. And we shouldn't be ashamed of the gospel. And so, you know, even like this, what am I doing? I'm a YouTube preacher. This is like lowest of the barrel, bottom of the barrel for society. Can't believe you're preaching on the internet. Like, we hate you already. And I'm not even doing a good job, right? It's not perfect. And what are my motives? And why am I putting this on YouTube? But it's to encourage. And who cares if it's not perfect? That's the point. You have to just share. You have to be who you are. You cannot constrain yourself to the point of being quiet to satisfy ridiculously high pressure and regulations. It's going to choke you out. It's going to make you bitter, maybe. It's going to make you quiet when you shouldn't be quiet. And you're never even going to get better at sharing because you won't have practice. I probably already made that point a couple times, but I'm just embodying my own message here. I'm doing an okay job at saying you should also be allowed to do an okay job. And you're never going to get better if you don't practice. So my hope is that you would feel free from overly burdensome regulation, and that you would feel inspired to try to represent God openly and with great courage, knowing that you might fail, and that's okay. In fact, I don't think you really have a successful, healthy life if you've never failed at anything. So, be encouraged, and I'll see you next time.